The sun hovered low over the jagged horizon, setting the sky ablaze with strokes of crimson and gold. Dust swirled across the dry plains, rising in lazy spirals like restless spirits. Inside her weathered log cabin, Mara Hart pressed her palm flat against a rough-hewn door, listening to the wind's mournful song through the cracks. Every creak would echoed memories she fought to bury. The cry of an infant she'd held to briefly, the laughter of a husband whose place beside her now lay empty. Tonight, under that burning sky, Mara felt loss as keenly as the parched earth under her boots. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. A sudden rap at the door jolted her from sorrow's edge. Heart pounding, she reached for the rifle leaning against the mantel. Outside, the twilight revealed a lone figure. Tall, lean, draped in a cloak of dust and feathers. His skin was the color of scorched mesquite, his dark eyes wet with desperation. Clutched in his arms lay a tiny bundle, wrapped in tattered cloth. No sound escaped the warrior's parched lips, only the silent beseeching of a father who had run from death itself. Mara's breath hitched. She loosened her grip on the rifle, her heart a drumbeat of fear and compassion. She stepped back, slipping inside, and the cabin's small hearth-light cast her shadow long across the plank floor. The warrior followed, gingerly crossing the threshold, as though afraid to pollute this settler's refuge with his sacred grief. Mara sat down a wooden stool by the hearth and gestured him to sit. He shook his head, refusing, his gaze locked on the infant's pale face. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell with each labored breath. Furrows of grief carved deep lines into the warrior's forehead. He raised his hand to his throat, throatily whispering a single word in Apache. Ma, mother. Mara knelt before them, words failing. Her own child had starved in her arms 10 months before, leaving her womb hollow as a dry well. She'd buried that pain under chores and chores of daily survival, hauling water, tending a meager garden of parched beans, patching the cabin's rotting planks against wind that threatened to tear it apart. Yet now, this stranger's plea shattered her careful walls. She pressed a hand to her chest, where grief still throbbed. Then she rose, walked toward her wooden cot, and unpinned the rough homespun shawl at her waist. The warrior's throat caught as Mara bared herself, not in shame, but in necessity. She felt the cool air kiss skin grown tight and hollow since her son's passing. The baby's lips parted, tiny and hollowed, and a whimper slipped free. Mara settled onto the stool and drew the infant close. His eyelids fluttered, and his mouth sought her. Mara closed her eyes against the swell of memory, the softness of her lost child, his welcome warmth. She guided the stranger's babe to her breast, and the moment his lips closed around her nipple, the cabin hushed to a sacred silence. Outside, the wind stilled, as if the prairie itself bowed to this act of grace. The warrior dropped to one knee, head bowed, uncertain tears trailing down his cheeks. Mara watched the baby suckle, felt the gentle tug that both pained and healed the empty ache inside her. She remembered a lullaby once sung by her own mother, a soft melody about corn and rain, about sky and earth joining in love. She hummed that melody now, each note a benediction for this lost child. The warrior's breath of chest rose and fell with ragged sobs. Mouth pressed to the floorboards, he gave thanks in a language she did not speak. When the baby finally loosened his grip, sated and serene, Mara laid him against her gown, smoothing back the wispy hair on his forehead. The warrior dared a trembling step forward, placing a single white feather at her feet, an offering of gratitude and respect, etched with charcoal strokes signifying the 4 directions of his people. Mara picked up the feather, feeling the soft barbs brush against her fingertips. She studied the strokes, a circle for unity, lines for balance. She tucked the feather behind her ear, placing it in her dark braid. In that gesture, an unspoken bond was forged, 2 souls intertwined by shared need and fragile hope. Night deepened beyond the small windows, the stars glittering like distant promises. Mara built the fire higher and warmed pinto beans she'd cooked earlier, stirring in dried venison for protein. She offered a bowl to the warrior, who hesitated, then accepted with a curt nod. Neither spoke. Sound of slurping beans and the crackle of flames filled the cabin. Each bite seemed to revive the warrior's strength, even as his eyes never left the sleeping babe cradled in Mara's lap. She felt his pain, his love, his fierce determination to protect this final piece of his world. When the bowl was empty, the warrior reached into his cloak, producing a small carved figurine of Coyote. Emblematic trickster, teacher, survivor. He laid it beside Mara's bowl. No words came, but the gift spoke of honor, of sharing whatever remained. Touched, Mara gently placed her hand atop the carving, whispering thanks in the broken Apache she'd learned from a traveler months before. A soft smile curved the warrior's lips. In that fleeting warmth, Mara sensed her own defiance kindle. Here, on the edges of civilization, she could reject the fear and prejudice that divided settler and native. Here, she could choose compassion over contempt. They sat by the hearth until the last embers died, the baby sleeping soundly against Mara's breastplate. Finally, the warrior rose, glancing to the door. Mara aimed her lantern toward the threshold. Outside, the wind had carved strange patterns in the dust. Footprints of wolves, a faded wagon track, the imprint of horseshoes. He motioned for Mara to follow. She hesitated only a moment, then wrapped the shawl around her shoulders and stepped out onto the porch. The warrior led her across the stoop and pointed toward the moonlit plains, where a battered pinto mare grazed restlessly. Beyond, the silhouette of a small Apache encampment lay against the horizon. Heart hammering, Mara realized the journey was only beginning. The warrior drew a map in the dust with his finger, a path through canyon, and arroyo to his people's winter camp. He looked to the sleeping babe, then up at Mara, eyes chanting silent prayer. Will you risk all for him? The chill night air whispering through the cabin behind her seemed to beckon her back to solitude. Yet in his gaze, she found a reflection of her own longing, to nurture, to protect, to forge a family from fractured lives. As the wind carried a lone coyote's howl across the prairie, Mara took a steadying breath. Flames of fear and hope danced in her chest. She straightened her shoulders, gazing at the warrior's bowed head, at the tiny chest of his child rising and falling with steady life. Without a word, she nodded once, an affirmation of courage, of compassion. He looked up, surprise softening the pain etched on his face. Then he lifted the infant high between them, as if offering him to the sky. The moon's pale light silvered the baby's face, and Mara felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her. At that moment, distant hoofbeats thundered across the plain. Shadows loomed beyond the flicker of lantern light. Mara's hand tightened on the feather in her braid. The warrior drew his blade, its metal catching the moon's glow. A low murmur rose from the unseen riders, settlers of the nearby outpost, their distrust and anger as sharp as any bullet. Mara inhaled the arid air, tasting steel and smoke. Her heart thrummed with determination. She had chosen this path. Now, with baby in arms, she prepared to stand between life and those who would take it away. A figure rode into view, a tall man astride a black roan, spurs chiming in the night. His scarred face hard as flint, he reined in alongside the cabin. Mara's breath froze. Dawn and dusk held equal danger on this frontier, with the baby's light weight against her chest. She stepped forward, placing herself between the warrior and the threat. The man's eyes flicked from the infant to Mara, and then to the warrior at her side. Veins pulsed at his temple. He drew in a ragged breath, lips curling. No Apache blood in these parts. He spat, voice laced with poison. The moon slipped behind a cloud, casting them all into shadow. Mara raised her chin, feeling the tremor of resolve. Behind her, the warrior braced to strike. In her arms, the baby stirred, eyelids fluttering. Somewhere in the darkness, the howl of wolves rose again, a chorus of wild promise and warning. The standoff held the hush of a desert calm before the storm. Mara met the settler's glare, saw the hatred gleaming like a drawn knife. Then she looked down at the infant's sleeping face, so peaceful, so precious, and felt the solid truth anchor her heart. She would fight for this child as fiercely as any mother. Thunder rolled in her stomach. The night waited breathless as Mara Hart, widow turned guardian, prepared to defy prejudice and claim a family born of loss and courage. And somewhere, deep on the wind-raked plain, the next chapter of their lives beckoned, painted in firelight and blood, in hope and defiance, ready to be written. Moonlight spilled across the cabin's porch as Caleb Holt fixed Mara Hart with narrowed eyes. He spat and kicked Grit with his boot. "I see the Apache brings his brat here," he growled. Behind him, 3 riders on Pinto Maras shifted uneasily, rifles resting across their saddles. The baby in Mara's arms stirred, eyelids fluttering. A low wind carried a wolf's distant howl, as though the prairie itself braced for violence. Mara pressed her back against the rough-hewn doorframe, lantern light trembling across her features. Inside, the dying hearth cast dancing shadows on Kael's etched face. His sinewy hand hovered above the carved bow slung across his back, knuckles white. He said nothing, but his stance spoke of every raid his people had survived, and every loss. Mara drew a breath to steady her voice. "He is no threat," she said, stepping forward into moonlight. She offered the baby's small head to the settler, hoping mercy might bloom in a hardened man's heart. Caleb's lips curled. "This is our land, woman. No Apache blood runs in these parts." He spat tobacco onto the boards. "Harbor that child, and you risk your life. And this one's. Put him out there with his kind before dawn." He jerked his chin toward the blackened plains. His men shifted their rifles. The night held its breath, waiting for a spark to set ablaze. Mara's grip tightened on the infant's blanket. The feather in her braid brushed her shoulder. Kael's silent pact of respect. She drew herself tall. "He belongs to whoever keeps him alive," she said, voice low and defiant. "I am his mother now." The baby's tiny fist clenched around her thumb, affirming her words in the only way he could. Behind her, Kael shifted weight, arrowhead catching pale light, his gaze locked on Caleb's silhouette. Mara felt the thrum of his promise to protect this child, a river of resolve beneath her spine. Holt's glower deepened. He raised a gloved hand, ready to order his men forward, when a distant lantern bobbed into view from the road. A mare came galloping into range, dust kicking up in silver coils. The rider reined into the edge of the porch, light revealing Hannah Black, the town's storekeeper and midwife. Her homespun dress bore flower smudges, her dark braid pinned with a copper pin. Slung across her breast was a Winchester carbine. Without hesitating, she dismounted, lantern held high in one hand, rifle leveled at Caleb's men. "Put those guns down," she called evenly. Her voice carried the authority of someone used to delivering life into the world. Caleb's riders hesitated, glancing at one another. He spat again, fury flaring. "It's settled, then. Tonight, I claim this cabin or burn it." He turned his roan and led his men away, hoofbeats fading into the desert's hush. Mara exhaled, legs weakening. She sank onto the steps, relief and exhaustion coiling in her chest. Kael knelt beside her, brushing back a lock of her hair. The baby nestled sleepily against Mara's breast. Hannah set down a cloth sack at Mara's feet. Flour, sugar, dried venison, a vial of whiskey. "For strength tonight," she murmured. "Word travels fast. You've earned every ounce of help I can spare." Kael stretched out a hand, offering the wrapped coyote carving he'd carried since dawn. Mara opened the cloth to reveal the little wooden figure, its muzzle carved with care, front paws outstretched. "For life," he said in Apache, voice husky with gratitude. Mara took it gently, feeling the cool grain beneath her fingertips. "Thank you," she whispered, meeting his solemn gaze. He cleared his throat. "My name is Tavahatava. The eagle soars." He pointed to Mara, then to the sleeping babe. His dark eyes shimmered with sorrow she recognized too well. His mother, she died in spring. Smallpox. His voice broke. He drew a deep breath, steeling himself. You give him life again. Mara pressed her lips together against a wave of shared grief. She cradled the infant tighter, feeling his heartbeat against her ribs. The baby's lashes twitched, and his small hand slid from the blanket to curl around Mara's finger. Awe rose in her throat. His name will be Dakota, she said softly. Friend to all, a promise of peace. Kael repeated the name like a prayer, letting its shape fill the night. Inside the cabin, the embers glowed red. Hannah ladled beans and strips of dried venison into tin bowls, handing one to Kael, one to Mara. They ate in companionable silence, only the scrape of spoons against metal breaking the hush. Every bite tasted of solidarity. Settler and Apache sharing a meal against a world that sought to divide them. Hannah swept a hand across the dusty floor, then drew a crude map in the grit. Waterholes, game trails, hidden canyons, each landmark marked with a careful symbol. This is the way to your camp, she said, pointing along the line. Follow the arroyo until you reach the mescal thickets, then north past the Twin Buttes. Keep off the main trail. Kael studied the etchings, nodding. Mara appeared at the map, mind whirling. To leave meant abandoning her cabin, her only link to a life now gone. Fear fluttered in her chest, but when she looked at Dakota's serene face, fear fled. She pressed a palm to his chest. I'll take you home, she promised. Kael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, warmth passing between them. Hannah gathered her map, tucking it into Mara's satchel. She pressed a homespun blanket into Mara's arms, embroidered with corn and eagle motifs. For luck, she said. For peace. Mara folded the blanket around the baby, the ruffles soft against his cheek. Each thread felt woven with hope and defiance. Outside, the moon had slipped behind rolling clouds, casting them into near darkness. Above, stars flickered like distant watchers. Mara's heart pounded as she readied her few possessions: flour sack, satchel, and oil lantern. She glanced at the cabin's door, memory of every loss echoing in every plank. Kael drew an arrow from his quiver, knocking it with deliberate calm. He drew her braid, sealed with Kael's feather, and braided it into a leather cord. At that moment, a single rifle shot cracked the still night. Pebbles exploded at Mara's feet. Horses whinnied in startled fear. The blast echo rolled across the plains, then died. Mara froze. Dakota clutched to her breast. Kael's bow twanged as he drew an arrow, gaze fixed on the ridge above. Hannah dove for cover behind the mare's flank, rifle at the ready. Silence fell again, thick, tense, charged. The moon's pale glow returned, illuminating the trio on the porch. Settler woman, Apache warrior, and a newborn child who embodied both courage and hope. Mara met Kael's dark eyes. No words passed, but every breath confirmed it. They would journey into the unknown together. Dawn was minutes away, and beyond it, every step would test the fragile bond they'd forged, yet also sealed against any hate the world might send. Lightning bright in the gloom, Dakota stirred, blinking up at Mara. His small face held only trust. Mara clutched him closer. Behind her, Kael's arrow remained trained on the ridge. The shot demanded action, either flee or stand. Mara inhaled dust-dry air, tasting steel and earth. We go, she whispered. Dakota cooed in reply. And with that soft sound, the first step of the defiant journey into dawn began. Moonlight stood sentinel above the arroyo as Mara Hart jolted upright at the crack of rifle fire. Beside her, Kael pressed back Hannah with a frown of caution. The midwife's lantern swung, casting wavering beams across the rocky gulch. The baby, Dakota, woke with a startled cry, tiny fists batting at Hart's soft blankets. Mara gathered him tight, heart hammering. The world of cabin shadows had slipped away. Now, in the wilderness, they were prey on parched ground. She did not hesitate. Gathering her satchel, she slid down the slope into night's embrace, her decision clear as bone-dry cottonwood. Their flight followed Hannah's sketch map, a whisper of hillside followed by a narrow pass between mescal thickets. Kael moved ahead, silent as a coyote, pausing only to gesture directional certainty. Mara rucked a blanket around Takota's shoulders, branches and mescal needles scratching her wool skirt. Every breath tasted desert grit. The distant ridge trembled with hoofbeats. Caleb Holt's men pursuing them like wolves, tracking blood. Mara swallowed her fear against a dry throat. The boundary between past and present dissolved in every crunch of stone beneath their boots. Mara's heart tugged for the cabin she left behind, the last anchor to a life now broken beyond repair. The thought of its empty hearth, flickering with memory alone, lanced sorrow into her chest. Guilt and grief warred. Could she abandon her home, the only place that had ever welcomed her? Yet each breath of Takota's fragile life under her chin reminded her why she fled. No walls of wood or log could supplant the home she carried in her arms. In a moment of fragile calm, Kael halted beside a jagged boulder. He drew from his pock leather bag a thin woven cord, twined from yucca fibers and dyed with sagework grease. He held out to Mara for colored strands, red for life, yellow for sun, black for night, white for dawn. Each hue whispered of Apache teachings, balance, renewal, resilience. Mara traced her fingertip along the twisting cords. "For your braid," Kael said softly. Mara braided the cord into her hair, feeling its weight as promise and pact. They reached a dry creek bed, a hollow of sun-baked stones and shuttered shale. Water had not coursed here since spring's thaw. Kael crouched, finger raised to silence. He guided Mara and Hannah through the rocky channel, every step careful against loose stones. Takota cooed softly in Mara's arms. Above, the distant roar of hoofs signaled pursuit. Mara felt her breath hitch as Caleb Holt's men thundered across the thistle-strewn banks. Kael's dark eyes flashed. He drew an arrow and knocked it with a practiced inhale, silent threat for any who dared follow. Mara pressed back against the stony bank. Takota nestled beneath her chin. Every heartbeat echoed anger and fear. Hannah laid a hand on Mara's shoulder, lending steadiness. A single shot rang out, splintering rock overhead. Pebbles tumbled around them. The baby whimpered, small voice raw with fright. Mara rocked him closer, whispering rhythms like lullabies she had once sung to her own son. Kael scanned the shadows. Each breath of wind could carry a rifle's report. Yet in the hush between echoes, Mara felt the strength of Kael's promise to protect them. They moved on, emerging from the creek bed into a moonlit basin dotted with mescal and sage. Takota's small hand reached out, brushing Mara's cheek. His trust stirred fierce protectiveness in her chest. Kael led the way toward a stand of scrubbed junipers where they might find concealment. As they walked, Mara's mind churned. Fear of Caleb's return war with hope of reaching the Apache camp before dawn. She glanced at Kael's silhouette, steady, unyielding, and drew courage from his silent resolve. Hannah lagged slightly behind, breath coming in measured gasps. Mara turned to find sweat glistening on her forehead. Concern flared. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Hannah shook her head. "No," she panted, voice hoarse. "Just memories." She paused, eyes distant. "I lost my husband to a fever 3 years back, left our Alva fatherless." Her hand hovered over her heart, helping Takota. "I remember what healing feels like." Mara offered her a nod of gratitude. In that shared confession, the three souls, settler, midwife, and Apache, found an unspoken kinship forged by loss. Stars wheeled overhead as the trio reached the canyon's edge. Below, a faint swirl of dust marked the main trail, where Caleb's men scoured the land. Mara's pulse throbbed, each beat a countdown to confrontation. But when she glanced at Kael, she saw something steadier than fear. Fierce love in his dark eyes aimed at Takota's sleeping form. Their bond, so fragile, so defiant, glowed like embers in the night. Mara squeezed Kael's hand, wordless vow between them. She steeled herself. No matter the cost, she would bring this child safely home. A low breeze stirred the mescal, carrying distant cries and gusts of dust. Kael beckoned Mara downward into a hidden gulch carpeted with soft, dried grass. There he set Dakota gently on a woven mat of buffalo hide, the child blinking up at sparkles overhead. Mara knelt beside him, brushing a wisp of hair from his forehead. She hummed a melody half-remembered from childhood, about corn and rainbows and hawks gliding beneath the sun. Kael watched, chest rising with respect, as Mara's voice wove a lullaby bridging two worlds. But from the gulch's mouth came the clamor of shouts and the jangle of spurs. Caleb's men poured into the basin, lanterns swaying like captured fireflies. The hush shattered. Kael's bow flashed upward, arrows drawn. Mara scooped up Dakota, the baby's wide eyes reflecting both terror and trust. Hannah dropped to one knee, rifle raised. Dust spiraled and shadows lunged. Mara pressed Dakota's cheek against her heart, whispering, "Come, my son," in English and in the Apache she'd learned. The night bristled with desperation, and love that roared louder than any gunshot. They sprinted toward a narrow gap between twin buttes, every step fueled by adrenaline. Behind them, rifle cracks echoed like thunder. Mara's knees burned, blood humming. Dakota fussed, disquieted by the chase. Kael wove between rocks, urging them on. At the gap's mouth, flickers of firelight danced across carved totems, marking Apache territory. Relief and uncertainty mingled in Mara's chest. They had reached the threshold of safety, but beyond it lay unknown perils. Mara pressed Dakota close, gazing at Kael's set jaw and Hannah's determined eyes. In the swaying lantern glow, she whispered, "We've made it." But Caleb's final shout rang out, chilling her blood. Kael's muscles coiled as more lantern lights flickered on the ridge above. Mara pressed Dakota against her chest, feeling his heartbeat thrum like tiny drums under her palm. Hannah's rifle snatched a final echo against canyon walls. Then silence returned, an evil hush that tasted of dread. The wind carried sounds of restless horses and distant voices, chanting commands she could not understand. Shadows galloped where the moon dared not reach, pawing loose stones and throwing cognac-brown dust into their path. Mara's eyes stung with tears she refused to shed. Her chin lifted in stubborn hope. Ahead, the carved totems of her child's people wavered in lantern glow. She inhaled, soul braced. Beyond that threshold lay sanctuary, or blood and cruel hidden treachery. Moonlight quailed behind a mantle of cloud as Mara Hart stepped into the Apache camp's folded earth circle. Mesquite groves shimmered in lantern light, and hide lodges curved like sleeping beasts around a central fire pit. Smoke curled skyward, embers drifting like restless spirits. The air tasted of roasting venison and damp earth. Mara pressed Dakota close, feeling his life pulse beneath the homespun shawl. Kael led the way, spear in hand, every footfall silent with purpose. Hannah followed, lantern raised in one hand, rifle slung across her back. The hush of anticipation settled around them. Safety and danger intertwined as roots beneath the ground. They threaded between lodges, eyes adjusting to lamplit faces. Children crouched near cones of warm cornmeal, hushed at the stranger's approach. Warriors laid aside bows and peace medals, watching every step. Mara's heart thudded. She was an outsider here, stranger to their tongue and customs. Yet when Kael lifted his hand in greeting, the watchers parted like reed curtains. At the camp's heart sat Elder Nana, white hair bound with eagle quills, voice tempered by years of council fire. He rose, staff in hand, and lowered himself before them in solemn welcome. Mara knelt, Dakota nodding sleepily against her chest. Nanta's gaze measured her, grief defiance, compassion mirrored in her eyes. He tapped his staff and murmured a blessing in Apache for waters and new life. Kael crouched beside Mara, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. No words passed between them. His presence spoke of trust he had won through hardship and mercy. Nana motioned to a warrior named Aunt, lean, young, eyes hard as elk hooves, who remained framed in shadow, arms crossed. Aunt stared with scrutiny incarnate. He stepped forward, jaw clenched, but paused at Nanta's gentle gesture. His gaze flicked to Mara, then to the infant brace against her breast. She felt his doubt as tangibly as the night air. Past prejudice and sorrow coiled between them. Mara swallowed. She held out her free hand, palm uncovered, an offering of peace. Aunt's tight lips softened for a heartbeat. Then he inclined his head in wary acceptance. Hannah exhaled, relief softening her shoulders. From a lodge came a low chant. Nanda beckoned Mara to follow, and led her to a circle of woven mats around the fire. There, a woven blanket lay draped across a carved sandstone block, a gift for the new mother. Each panel embroidered with corn ears and hawk feathers, signifying nourishment and freedom. Nanda touched the fabric reverently, then offered it to Mara. She drew the blanket around Dakota, the wool cool against her cheek. The child stirred, eyelids fluttering as if waking to a promise. Mara sat on the edge of a mat and began to sing, softly, in the Apache lullaby Kael had taught her, a gentle melody of desert rain and starry skies. The tent poles groaned in rhythm, and the firelight danced on her face. Dakota's brow unfurrowed, his breathing eased. Around her, camp members hummed beneath her song, women elders and warriors blending settler melody with Apache cadence. Hannah knelt at Mara's side, weaving sage into Mara's braid as a charm against danger. As the lullaby wound to silence, Mara placed her palm to the earth and let its warmth shore her resolve. Doubt flared. Could she ever belong among these people? Could an outsider mother another's child and be accepted? Yet when Kael drew close, touching her hand with tenderness and pride, those fears receded. She lifted Dakota and pressed his cheek to her lips. In his slight smile she found affirmation. She was home where he thrived. Nanda began a prayer, speaking of ancestors and crossing of sun and moon. Kael rose and rummaged through his pouch, withdrawing a small oblong stone carved with his wife Arinya's name. His voice caught as he told Mara of her courage, how Arinya traded her life to shield lost hunters from a settler raid. Camp silence honored the tale. Mara laid a gentle hand on Kael's arm, recognizing shared grief's gift of empathy. He brushed her palm with the carved stone, legacy of sacrifice and love. Nearby, Hannah moved among tents, binding a small scratch on Aunt's forearm where a stray briar had drawn blood during pursuit. Aunt's lips quirked once in grudging gratitude as she whispered Sal's promise. In those moments, Mara saw Hannah's quiet strength as lifeline, bridge between settler and native worlds. The camp settled into a pulse of conversation and crackling fire, every voice a thread in the tapestry of survival. Children draped in breechcloths sat cross-legged by steaming patahominy, their laughter faint but hopeful. Women moved along the fire's edge, stirring iron kettles with dried squash and chia seeds, offering bits of food to Mara and Hannah, unspoken welcome. The scent of juniper smoke mixed with sweat and warm earth. Aunt returned from the ridge with 2 scouts, nodding to Nanta before kneeling. They reported hoofbeats echoing through canyon passes, the pursuers drawing near. A hush fell as the camp sensed loss of its quiet rhythm. All knew that the coming hour would test bonds woven in peace. But beneath the glow of mesquite-fueled fires, tension coiled. Warriors sharpened arrows and laid out shields. Scouts stationed along ridges. Mara felt the tightening noose of Caleb Holt's men inching closer. Each thump of distant hoof echoed like a drum, calling war. She rose, pulling Dakota close, cloak trailing against dust. Kael joined her, eyes on the horizon, hand moving to rest on his bow's curve. Nanda stepped quietly before them, palm raised for calm. "We prepare," he said in Apache and English haltingly, "for those who break our peace." His words spread through the circle. Mara's heart flared. She would stand by this camp, whatever came. Hannah hefted her rifle and moved to the camp's edge, scanning the canyon mouths. Aunt took his place at her side, his earlier suspicion replaced by shared determination. The union of settler midwife and young warrior embodied the possibility of unity, voices murmur of ancestors guiding their hands, and the crackle of fire softly seems to echo each pulse of worry. Suddenly, a horn's blast shattered the night. Lanterns sparked on the ridges. Caleb's silhouette mounted on his black roan, the night fired by the glint of rifles and desperation. A voice boomed across the starlit plain. "Surrender the Apache brat and his witch mother, or we burn your lodges and spill your blood." The hawk emblem on Kael's cloak picked up pale light as he stepped forward, clan markings rippling like a storm's warning. Mara felt Dakota stiffen in her arms, his small face pinched with fright. She looked at Kael, his jaw set, muscles coiled. Then she met Aunt's fierce gaze, acceptance now tempered with defiance. Hannah covered Mara's back, rifle steady in her grip. Nanta raised a staff, summoning calm in their hearts. Firelight danced in every eye, Mara's lungs filled with purpose. This was a crucible where fear and courage would collide. She drew Dakota closer, whispering, "We are family." And as the thunder of hooves swelled once more, the Apache warriors lifted their bows. Settlers gripped rifles, and the night stood on the precipice of war or peace. Mara locked in a silent vow to protect her son beyond any border. Moonlight retreated behind rolling clouds as Caleb Holt's final threat hung heavy in the air. Arrows quivered on bowstrings. Warriors' breath billowed in pale puffs. Mara Hart pressed Dakota close, feeling his rapid heartbeat beneath her shawl. Hannah Black stood firm beside Aunt, rifle at ready, eyes steady. Crickets chirred uncertain accompaniment to the hush that fell across the Apache camp's circle of hide lodges. Elder Nana raised a staff carved with eagle motifs, his voice a calm tide. "We welcome peace." Smoke trails curled skyward from fire pits like signals for truce. Mara's grief hardened into determination. She would stand here as mother and protector, her love a shield stronger than any bow. Even the wind softened its song to witness their resolve. The night air smelled of sage and roasting venison, carrying both hunger and hope across the glowing embers. Footsteps of settlers faded beyond the camp's edge, as if the earth itself refused to harbor bloodshed tonight. From the trail's mouth came the slow creak of wagon wheels. Lantern light bobbed to mesquite as Reverend Abraham Jacobs emerged, a preacher known among settlers and native tribes for bridging worlds. Chains of lanterns dangled from the wagon's yoke, each lantern a silent witness to the night's history. His gray beard caught firelight, and his coat bore patches from faded quilts stitched by frontier hands. His deep-set eyes shone with quiet authority. "Caleb Holt," Jacobs called, raising both hands palm forward. "Lay down your weapons and listen." A hush swallowed spurs jangle. Jacob stepped beside the animal's flank, pressing a gnarled finger to Holt's chest, transfusing decades of trust built between pulpit and council fire. "Violence solves nothing tonight," Jacobs intoned, voice gravel and grace. "There is mercy for the child and the mother who saved him." Hannah took Jacobs's words and spoke herself. "Dakota is innocent. Let his life shine brighter than rage." She lowered her rifle, but Aunt's arrow remained nocked until Nana nodded. Kael exhaled and set bow aside with ceremonious care, each motion deliberate, and watched as warriors unwound their arrows, settling shields onto ground. Mara stepped into firelight, Dakota cooing sleepily. She extended her free hand, palm open in greeting, offering trust to the world that had taken her husband and firstborn. Caleb's men exchanged uncertain glances. Some spat dust, others swallowed nervously. Nanta's soft chant rippled through the circle of lodges, weaving settler and Apache tongues in a prayer for harmony. In that sacred moment, anger lost its edge. Beside the fire's dying embers, Mara knelt before a weathered mesquite post and retrieved her carving knife. With fingers trembling, she cut deep furrows into the wood. Tika Die, friend to all. Each letter released a drop of blood to stain the grain, connecting her life's sorrow to this child's promise. Sparks from the fire illuminated the carving, turning mesquite into living tapestry of hope and history. Camp drums rested by lodges, their skins warm from evening's vigil, silent guardians of peace. Mara's tears glistened as she traced each letter, every drop binding her spirit to Dakota's future. Kael placed a woven yucca cord at the post's base, entwining his story with hers. Elder Nanta pressed his staff beside their offerings, sending a blessing across the camp. In the hush that followed, Mara laid her palm upon the carving, sealing her vow to protect Dakota, her second chance at motherhood, born of mercy beneath a starlit sky. In the glow of shifting embers, Kael drew a small pouch from his belt and withdrew a star-shaped pendant carved from mother of pearl, gift from a desert trader who once spoke to his wife. Kael's voice was husky with memory. Orinya believed light always finds a lost. He placed the pendant in Mara's open palm, the shell's soft iridescence catching firelight. Its edges were smooth as river stones, carved with incisions like corn kernels. Mara clasped it around her neck with sinew thread, its cool weight against her throat a steady reminder of hope reborn. She felt its brightness warm her skin, a beacon in the darkest nights. She closed her eyes, sensing Orinya's spirit smile through Kael's gesture. As the camp murmured blessings in a lullaby of mixed accents, Mara felt her grief transform into purpose, her outsider's heart woven into the Apache fold by love's enduring cord. While children stirred from frozen cries and women offered bowls of steaming hominy, Hannah moved through the camp, binding bruises and offering salve. An approached her, forearm scarred from briar chase, head bowed in thanks. Hannah's hands moved deftly, wrapping bandages with cloth torn from her apron. She whispered comfort in both tongues, her compassion a bridge across fear and anger. Drums of peace lay quiet in shadowed corners, awaiting new rhythms of unity. Women wove sage ties into children's braids, intertwining settler ribbons with Apache turquoise beads. In those gentle tasks, the camp's heartbeat grew steady. Scouts returned to top ridges, reporting Caleb's hoofbeats receding into the night. Warriors removed painted war drips from shields, replacing them with feathered arrows for peace. As dawn's prelude brushed clouds and pale rose, camp members exchanged nods, hard-won trust glinting in their eyes like morning dew. Dawn's first light spilled across the canyon, igniting dust in golden rivers. Mara awoke beneath a buffalo-hide blanket, Kael's arm cradling her shoulders. Dakota, snug in his homespun shawl, reached for the pendant at Mara's collar with chubby fingers. His soft laugh rippled through the camp, scattering shadows like fleeing quail. Above, hawks wheeled on warming thermals, calling in the new day. Mara watched Kael gather warriors and families at a winding spring beyond the lodges. There, under the rippling water song, they would sow corn in memory of Orinya and Mara's child, seed and sacrifice coalescing in rich soil. Mara rose, brushing ashes from her skirt, and took Dakota's hand, stepping into Dawn's embrace as mother, protector, and family. At the spring's edge, Kael extended his hand to Mara. Together, they pressed seeds into furrows, golden kernels biting into dark earth. Aunt and Nanta poured water from a gourd, each drop blessing the row. Hannah scattered sage branches around the young shoots, warding off ill will. The morning chorus of birds rose in harmonies neither settler nor Apache had heard alone. Mara scooped earth over seeds once more, feeling dust sift through her fingers like memory. She smiled at Dakota's playful hand patting green leaves, a promise of tomorrow. Kael brushed back her hair, the yucca cord weaving promise into their future. Behind them, hide lodges shimmered in first light, homeborn of courage and compassion. High on the ridge, Caleb Holt watched in silence, silhouette dark against the brightening sky. His men lingered uncertain, spurs and rifles at rest. Holt frowned, cloak damp with pre-dawn chill, then turned and trudged back toward the settlement, unable to deny the power of peace forged in fire and tears. Back at the camp, Mara lifted Dakota into her arms, cradling him like new sun. She placed her cheek against his, whispering his name in triumph and hope. Dakota. Kael stood close, spear laid aside, spearhead reflecting Dawn's promise. Behind them, ridges carved by centuries stood silent, witnesses to a bond forged by mercy. The camp's elders chanted blessings in low tones, voices blending wind and story. Mara squeezed Kael's hand, their totem post standing tall, like a sentinel of unity. They watched Dakota toddle toward ripening stalks, laughter ringing like new bells. and where corn would grow, so with love steadfast as the stars.